Good morning, everybody. I'm going to get things kicked off today. My name is Kayla Klein. I am representing Early Learners South Dakota today at this training. Just as a reminder to everybody that this meeting will be recorded and available on the website. I'll put that link in the chat for you to get the direct recording. If you have someone you think would be interested in watching it after this, please feel free to share that with them. Also, if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to put your name and the organization you represent and where you are in South Dakota in the chat, that would be lovely. Everyone get a chance to know each other. And just as a reminder that these trainings are all leading up to our Children's Day at the Capitol, which is happening on January 20th, 2022. If you are interested in attending, there was a registration for that sent out today. If you did not receive it, please let me know and I'd be happy to send it to you. You can also find it on our Early Learner Facebook page. And of course, you can just ask questions to me about it in the chat while we're on the call today. So thank you again for being here. And today, of course, we're being joined by Dr. Greg Boris. We want to thank him for being here today. And he's going to be talking to us about how to reach out. He is not only a South Dakota, Early Learner South Dakota stakeholder, but a wealth of knowledge, and we're very excited to have him talk with us today. Again, remember to put any questions you have for him in the chat, and I will be sure to kind of insert that during his presentation, or we will take pauses and take any questions. So thanks again, Greg, for your time, and we're looking forward to your presentation today. Take it away. Oh, Greg, you're on mute.
There we go. Good day to you all. I'm Greg Boris, and I'll be visiting with you over the next hour about how to reach out to our elected officials, your elected officials, so that hopefully some changes in areas that you're interested in can occur. I work with the University of South Dakota Center for Disabilities. And next slide, please. And one thing that happens on the next slide is it says, I have no disclosures, no financial disclosures. Kayla's not paying me anything. You know, nobody, this part of my job is to inform and educate people about policy. And that is what I'm here today to do. Next slide, please. I grew up in Chicago, but I have lived most of my adult life, like almost every year except for two, when I moved away for graduate school, here in Sioux Falls. By living in Chicago, which is a very political city, I learned somewhat about how politics works in that context. Next slide, please. And in addition to knowing about policy and disabilities and childcare, I have other areas of expertise. One is bicycling. I know a lot about bicycling and consequently a lot about transportation and transportation policy. And for many, many years up until COVID, I taught Irish dancing, which is a great way when you do those icebreaker things like, who would have thunk it? But I do, and I have those areas of expertise. Next slide, please. So as we go along, raise your hand. But as Kayla said, you know, put your questions in the chat box, and she'll get them to me, and I'll answer in one of three ways. I'll either give you an answer, or I will say I'm going to be getting to that, and I might just say I don't know, but I can maybe suggest some ways to find out. Now, over the last several weeks, and in fact, in the last 24 hours, I've had multiple conversations about childcare, unexpected. One, I was talking to a political candidate last night, and she was informing me about how several childcare centers in Sioux Falls are about to close, and that's putting people in a bind. Surprise, surprise. And then this morning, right before I came here, I had a cup of coffee at a local coffee shop, and I saw a friend of mine of my generation who's bicycling, and when I see her at the coffee shop, she usually bicycles to the coffee shop. And today she had one of those little baby carry baskets with a baby inside. I said, "What's this? What's this baby thing?" She said, "Well, one of her children is now back home going to school. They have kids and they have no childcare. So grandma is watching the kids." And so that, that coupled with an earlier conversation with one of our Sioux Falls area Chamber of Commerce people, one of their major topics of 3 topics in this legislative session will be childcare. In addition to workforce development, which you heard about recently with Jess Bromer, and also housing, affordable housing. Next slide, please. So for me, my career path said, well, I want to be a teacher. So I taught for many years. I thought, I want to make a difference by being a teacher with kids. And then I realized, if I was the administrator, I could affect all the teachers in my school and maybe make a bigger difference. And then I realized, well, administrators have to learn their stuff from somewhere. So I can become a college professor. So I taught at USD down in Vermillion for some years and taught people how to be school administrators. Then I realized I could only go so far as a college professor. And so I went to work for a nonprofit advocacy group that dealt with various issues, including early care and education. And I did that for some years. And now I'm working part-time with the University of South Dakota, in a sense, mentoring some folks as we look at what we can do to move the needle with regards to people with disabilities, how we can develop leadership skills, and how we can help get people involved in policy and advocacy. Next slide, please. So being an advocate means reaching out. It's about developing relationships with the people we elect. So last night when I was visiting with this political candidate, she said to me, she visited with a group of high school kids who were complaining about things much as high school kids do. And she said, well, what are you going to do about it? Did you talk to your city council person or whatever? And they said, you can do that. You can talk to city council people. You can reach out to them. You can do those sorts of things. And she said, yeah, these folks just were frozen. Like they were at one level and these elected officials are somewhere way above them. They are not. And that's the first thing I want to make sure you understand is the folks we elect are our neighbors, are our friends, the people we go to church with, are the people who we work with. And just because they have a title in front of their name doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're super special. When you reach out, first and foremost, the people we elect need to be educated about what you know. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, you as yourself can mobilize some people, and I'll talk about that. Or it's important to be not necessarily the leader, but part of the army behind a leader to help push an issue. You have to be mobilized. And finally, we need to all follow up. We can't take things for granted, and we need to be able to follow up to make sure that what we think we won, we actually did win, and that it is sustained. Next slide, please. So when we talk about relationships, the questions are, who do you know? As I mentioned, friends, neighbors, people you go to church with, people you work with. Then the question is, who do you want to know? That person looks interesting. I want to get to know that person. I want to, and it might be a political candidate. It might be someone who is at a coffee shop. So again, I drink more coffee than I probably should. And I go to coffee shops, and there was a guy of my generation who was there visiting with some friends of mine. And I was sort of eavesdropping on their conversation, and he sounded interesting. And I sort of inserted myself into the conversation and got to find out that he had just moved to Sioux Falls about a year ago, and he was enjoying living in downtown Sioux Falls, being able to walk around and go to everything he needs, and he was really enjoying it. So this was a guy I wanted to know. The next question is, how do you establish a relationship? I just talked about sort of like lurking and talking to somebody. We go to events at church, we go to events at work, get to know these people. Where I work at the Health Science Center, I am in the most remote office in the entire building. I'm in the basement, I'm in the last hallway, I'm in the last office. I have to get out of here because no one shows up in front of my door. I go up to the upper floors and I talk to people. I still don't know people, but I'm getting to know more and more people. So you go around and you walk around, you talk to people, you say hi to your neighbors. So as I mentioned, where do those relationships begin? I talked about work, church, and the like. And finally, and this is the hardest part for most folks, is just not being shy, being willing to take that step and say, hey, here's who I am. Tell me about yourself. Here's what I'm interested in. Tell me about yourself. And what are you interested in? Next slide, please. So I was talking to one of my neighbors a couple months ago, and he was saying, you know, when's a good time to plant a tree? And he was talking about a tree that he just bought. Should he plant it in the fall or in the spring? Now, I'm not an arborist, but I sort of took it to another level. I said, when's the best time to plant a tree? And that is 20 years ago, because then the tree's big and you get shade and you get birds in the trees. Then you get more leaves to rake, I suppose, too. But the same thing is true when we talk about educating folks and our elected officials, advocacy. When's the best time to do this? 20 years ago, 10 years ago, last night. Don't wait till something happens. Next slide, please. So the first question is to find out who, we're going to talk in terms of the state legislature. And the first thing to find out is, who are your legislators? Right now, every state legislator is elected for 2 years. Right now, they are in the second year of their term. So come November, they will be running for re-election if they're eligible. We have term limits that preclude some folks from running, or they don't want to switch over to another chamber. But the way to find out is go to sdlegislature.gov. Next slide, please. And on that page, you can click on the bottom left-hand box of those 6 boxes, and it says 2021 legislators, or we'll say now 2022 legislators. That will take you to a search engine. You put in your address, and you find out who are the 3 people, 2 representatives and 1 senator, in most cases, that represent you. We have a couple of districts where there's just 1 representative, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And then they also give you their email address, and they also give you phone numbers. So it gives you the basic information that you need to find out who your legislators are if you don't know who they are already. Next slide, please. As an advocate, as an informed citizen, we can offer 3 things. First of all, the key thing to keep in mind is the people we elect to our legislature have no staff, none. They have interns sometimes from political science departments at USD or SDSU. They might have volunteers, but generally, unless they're in leadership, they have no staff. Now, contrast that with my daughter, who lives in Pennsylvania, and their state legislators have staff. They can do stuff for them. Our state legislators have to rely on a group called a Legislative Research Council, which gives them information that they're looking for. But that's about it. They're supporting them in terms of information, but not in terms of advocacy. So from a citizen's point of view, we can offer them our time. That time can be with respect to campaigning. That time can be with respect to searching out information about a particular topic that they're interested in, but we can help them with our time. The second thing we can do is we can provide them with our talent. Everybody on this call has talent in some area, most likely early learning, early childhood sorts of things. You know, your talent is something that they rely on, and that's something that is important. It costs money to run for political office, and it's estimated that it's the average amount that a person running for the state legislature spends is between $10,000 and $12,000 a year. And people are being asked for money. If you like somebody and you think they should be elected, and you have a few spare coins, dollars, bills to share with them, please do, because they would appreciate that. So we can offer those three things: time, talent, and money. Next slide, please. So the question to ask yourself is, what do you know? Again, people we elect don't know much about those things. At one point, I was a lobbyist in Pierre, and one of the bills that was in front of the legislature was shooting coyotes from snowmobiles. I don't know squat about shooting coyotes at all, let alone from snowmobiles. But there was a lot of, and there are a lot of legislators who didn't know about that. But there were people who did, and those people who knew about shooting coyotes from snowmobiles educated those who did not. As a person who knows stuff, it's our duty to educate those we elect so they know the basics of what we know. They know that also we are a resource to them. A few years ago, the book The Death of Expertise was written by Tom Nichols, and in that the point that was made was, with social media and the internet and all, people who know stuff are having their authority undermined by people who don't know stuff. And I think we've seen that a lot with COVID. There's a lot of misinformation going on about COVID that's being accelerated by social media algorithms that make hot button issues sound even more hot button. There's also a concept that is in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which says basically people of low ability feel superior and mistakenly assess their ability as greater than it is. So I'll give an example about traffic and transportation. You know, if you live in a town that has a traffic light, you think, well, how hard is it to put in a traffic light? And one day, and I have done work in that area, and I was talking to a neighbor, and he said, we need a traffic light here. Why don't they put that up tomorrow? I said, well, you know, I started going through the construction process, the bid process, the different technologies. He says, it can't be that hard. All you got to do is dig a hole and put in an electric line and build a traffic light. I said, no, it's not that simple. But he thought it was. So, you know, we are combating that feeling that things are much simpler than they are, and that I know a lot more than maybe I think I really do know. Next slide, please. So the people we elect listen to certain folks. Most importantly, they listen to people they know, and they rely on them. So if you go to the state legislature, most legislators have a seatmate, and those seatmates may not be from their area. So when we go back to shooting coyotes from snowmobiles and talking to an urban legislator when that bill was up, so I don't know anything about that, but my seatmate is from rural South Dakota, so I listen to what he has to say. He teaches me about shooting coyotes from snowmobiles. Another thing is people listen, our elected officials listen to people with titles. So when people testify in front of the state committees on this, that, or the other, when someone says, I am Dr. So-and-so, you know, that carries some weight, you know, and whether the doctor is wearing a white coat or whether the doctor has a PhD, that still carries weight. And using that honorific adds some credence to one's testimony. Third is people with expertise, people who are working in the field, people who are childcare providers testifying about childcare. They have expertise in childcare. People who walk a lot in their community know about the pedestrian obstacles that are being faced in their community. Our legislators also listen to people who are representing groups, and that, you know, certain groups carry greater weight. You know, the State Medical Association carries more weight maybe than, no offense to SDAEYC, but probably carries more weight than the Association for Education of Young Children. And finally, our legislators listen to those people who reinforce their own opinions. This is what I thought. Oh yeah, I like you because you're saying that the way I think it should be said as well. Next slide, please. In peer, there are 4 types of lobbyists. And there, I'll talk about those for a moment. The first 3 of these lobbyists have to register with the Secretary of State's office. They have to pay a nominal fee. If they are representing an organization, the chair of that board has to say, yep, Greg Boris is our representative, and we endorse that. So there are those lobbyists that represent the government, usually the executive branch. So there are people from the governor's office, from the Department of Health, from the Department of Social Services, who go around representing that agency's view on particular pieces of legislation. There are those people who are hired to represent a business or organization. And these are folks who are professional lobbyists. They may be hired by 6, 7, 8 different groups. And you can tell who they are because all lobbyists wear a lanyard, a name tag, and that says Greg Boris, lobbyist for this organization. And if you are representing multiple organizations, you have like maybe 5, 6, 7 lanyards around your neck because you are representing different organizations. And then you know who you're representing, and people can see, yeah, he's representing the medical association, he's representing the trucking industry, or whatever it might be. Finally, those who are hired to work for an organization or an association and have lobbying as part of their job. So there's an organization, Association of Mental Health Centers in the state, and they have an executive director, and he does all sorts of things as executive director of that organization. One of those things is being the lobbyist for that organization. He goes to peer, he lives in peer, and he goes to the legislature, and he has one badge saying, I am the lobbyist for the Mental Health Association of organizations. All of those first 3 require registration with the Secretary of State. And then there's just the rest of us who say, here I am, Greg Boris. I live in Sioux Falls, and I'm concerned about this bill, and I'm going to testify. I am a citizen. I don't have to register as a lobbyist. I can just go up and testify. And anyone can testify. I'll give an example of that in a bit. But the caution here is if you testify and you use the word we believe that, we support this, the first question you will be asked is, who are we? Well, me and my neighbors and my other bicyclists or whatever it might be. Well, then you're representing them, and then you need to be registered as a lobbyist. Next slide, please. So when I worked as a lobbyist, I turned to other lobbyists and said, so like, how do you do this stuff? And they said, first and foremost, most of what you're doing is educating people. You're educating the elected officials. And it's important to educate them before you need to educate them. When I worked in some transportation projects, I would do service club presentations. And one of our lines was, if you see the bulldozers in front of your house, it's too late to change the road plan. The same thing's true with lobbying. If you're lobbying a bill, if you're talking about a concept about childcare, early learning, whatever it might be, it's important to let folks know before a bill comes out. Talk about the importance of that. The other part is to be totally accurate. When Jacqueline Sly was in the legislature and I was lobbying on a particular bill, she questioned me about the federal legislation associated with that bill. And I thought I knew it, and I hate reading federal law, but I actually did that, and I read it, and it was ambiguous. And I did further digging, and I found out that my interpretation was not correct. There were some twists and turns that helped Representative Sly better speak on behalf of that bill. It's also important to answer questions or to find out the answer and not make things up. If you don't know the answer, say it. And if you you can, try to find the answer. Use data selectively in this hot link here, which you'll get in the PowerPoint, you can look and laugh at. And then one thing that really resonates with legislators are stories. And I think of the former Representative Steve Hickey in Sioux Falls, who talked about workforce difficulty with hiring people in manufacturing jobs, and a story he heard from a manufacturing company that said they can't find anybody because everybody was addicted to meth. Every one of their applicants was addicted to meth, and they knew that because their teeth were awful. And so Representative Hickey was very vocal about the importance of the significance and importance of drug testing when it comes to various sorts of benefit programs for individuals. Next slide, please. It's important to communicate what's important. When I talked to this political candidate last night, she was really into the weeds, which is good because I'm a weed sort of guy. But when you're talking to general folks and you're talking to legislators, you need to keep it simple. If you start getting it complex, people's eyes glaze over. If you share something that's unexpected, that is important. So let's take it into the world of early learning. One of the major proponents of early learning in Sioux Falls in the last decade was a gentleman named Ron Moquist. Ron Moquist was the CEO of Raven Industries, which makes all sorts of techie sorts of things. But he was also very interested in early learning for a variety of reasons. And when he would speak on it, it's like, what is this guy in this very elegant suit and very nice hair talking about early learning? Why is a CEO of a major company talking about this? And he would explain that, but his presence was very unexpected. Credible. If you are working in the field, if you're working with kids, first and foremost, you have credibility. You are there, you are in the trenches, you know what's going on. And your credibility is important. People who talk about early learning who don't know what's going on, their credibility is suspect. But next is to have what you're communicating concrete. Make it so it's not theoretical, not all sorts of complex formulas or whatever, but have it very concrete and understandable. Emotion. To appeal to people's emotion, it has to be done selectively. When I was advocating on early care and education, my next door neighbor was a child care provider. And we lived in split entry homes. And it was a nice day out. She had a above ground pool off her deck with a tarp over it. And the deck door was open. The doorbell rang. She went down. The little 2-year-old toddled out through the deck door, fell onto the tarp, which had standing water on it, and drowned. That was tragic. And ironically enough, that the uncle of that little one was in the state legislature, and he used that story quite a bit to try to push an early a child care agenda, to the point that people would say, "Hey, just get over it." And it's like, wait a minute, your nephew dies, and you don't get over it. But that was the attitude. The final thing is, if you could wrap stuff up in a story, that is good. And it's misspelled. All these things are misspelled as success. It comes from Chip and Dan Heath's book, Made to Stick. If you can get 3 of those 6, that's pretty darn good. So again, you want to communicate things in a simple, unexpected, credible, concrete, emotional sort of story. Again, not all will come in. Next slide, please. And when you do plan on those things, practice it. A doctor I worked with some years ago wanted to testify on a bill at the legislature, and he was a super proficient doctor. He was great. And he was, every time I worked with him, he was just totally cool. He presented well and all, and he wanted to testify in a committee, and he was shaking in his boots. And so we worked on testifying, how to testify, and we practiced it. He practiced, and he went up here and he testified, and he did a great job testifying. So it's important to practice. Next slide, please. again, back to education. When do you educate? And the most important thing is before you need to do it. Today, we need to educate our elected officials on early learning. And if you wait, because if you wait, it could be too late. The other part is, another time to educate is when the bill actually shows up. Right now, today, legislators, the governor's office, actually, this has started several months ago, bills are being drafted to be put in front of the legislature next month. It's already happening. And if you wait, so another time to educate is when it goes before the elected body, but by that time, the train may be leaving the station, and it's important to be there when they're introduced, but again, do it when you can before it happens. When bad or good things happen, you know, Rahm Emanuel, who was the mayor of Chicago and President Obama's chief of staff for a while, said never let a crisis go to waste. When a bad thing happens, key on it. Now, unfortunately, with gun violence, with schools in particular, the general response is, no, it's not the right time to talk about gun control because everybody's in mourning. Well, you know, Michigan the other day, we just had another kid shoot up the place. You know, if that's something that's important to you, this is the time. It's not, you don't say get over it and then talk about it. It's the time is now when good or bad things happen. Next slide, please. Back to the point I made at the outset, you either mobilize or be mobilized. You take, by collective action, generally more things get done, and that's through political parties, associations like the South Dakota Association of the Education of Young Children. There might be advocacy groups of various sorts. Your neighbors, get your neighbors riled up about something. Right now, where I live, we have a street that is hard to cross. And I'm going to be talking to my neighbors about, can we put in some sort of crosswalk there or pedestrian activated signal, and see if we can collectively get the city to do that. There might be some ad hoc groups that just show up as well. Go back to, and one thing that's not on here is your unlikely allies. Again, Ron Moquist and Raven Industry. You don't think that Raven Industry would be interested in early learning, but they were very interested under his leadership. And there may be other groups as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first one deals with tobacco-free South Dakota. The next deals with free tuition and fees for those who are blind or visually impaired. The third is transportation-related one, I-229 in Sioux Falls and the interchanges. Next slide, please. So this is Dr. Alan Nord. Dr. Nord, I believe, recently retired as a family practice physician in Rapid City. And in the late 1990s, Dr. Nord made an appointment with then Governor Janklow to visit with him. Now, one thing about being a physician is people pay attention to physicians. They're very respected generally. And so he had an appointment with with Governor Janklow, showed up the governor's office. And the story I'm telling you is Dr. Nord is just retelling Dr. Nord's story. So I'm not making this up. I've heard him say this several times. And at that time, smoking was illegal in the state capital. So Dr. Nord goes to the waiting room outside the governor's office, and he goes in the governor's office, and Governor Janklow is sitting there smoking a cigarette. And Dr. Nord, and he says, "What do you want to talk about?" And Dr. Nord said, "I want to talk about making South Dakota tobacco free." And Governor Janklow said, "That will never happen until you show me your army." And over the next dozen years, 15 years, Dr. Nord built an army. And those armies, that army consisted of individuals and groups from across the spectrum, all pushing to have South Dakota become tobacco free. Now you go in a restaurant and it's like, well, of course they're tobacco free. You know, I expect that. But 15, 20 years ago, not so much. But it's all because Dr. Nord took the initiative and mobilized an army to support this, and took a long time to do it. Like I said, 10 or 15 years to make it happen, and there were intermediate steps along the way. The next slide, please. Okay, one of my colleagues is blind, legally blind, and he's working on his doctorate at the University of South Dakota. And he was taking, and I say all this again with his permission, because he said, use my story as often as you can. He was taking classes last year sometime, either last spring semester, or somewhere in 2020. And someone said to him, well, you know, there's free tuition if you're blind. He didn't know that. He said, well, you know, I'm blind, and this would be great. So he talked to the people at the University of South Dakota and said, you know, I'm legally blind and I'd like free tuition. And they said, well, no, you can't get it because we have these rules and those rules and this funding source and that funding source. He said, but in 1939, a law was passed to provide free tuition fees to people who are visually impaired. But the policies evolved to make that only available to people in in-person courses. Well, if you're blind, you're going to certainly drive down from Sioux Falls to Vermillion to take a course. With the advent of online education and with COVID, you know, a lot of the courses that he had to take just didn't exist in person. So back in October of last year, we were talking about this, and he was kind of complaining, and as we want to do as human beings. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? He said, well, what can I do? I said, first thing is write a letter to your 3 legislators and say, here, he had all the research done. He knew the law, he knew everything about it, and the history, how many students were using this, etc. And he wrote a letter to his 3 legislators. And 2 of them got back to him and said, hey, this is wrong, the way things are being done to you. This needs to change. Over the period of 2 months, November and December, and actually into January, he worked with those legislators and several others to develop a bill, House Bill 1196, which then went in front of committees. He testified in committees using the success format that we talked about. I was sort of his coach on this. And my view is, with the doctor who testified and with my colleague who testified, my goal is to coach. And here's how you do it. I'm not invested in the bill that you're talking about. I'm here to help you be successful in what you do. So he contacted the legislators and he got the ball rolling on this, and it passed out of one committee unanimously. Went on the consent agenda, meaning there was no debate on the floor. Went to the other chamber, passed the committee unanimously. Went on the consent agenda with no debate on the floor. So it went through and the governor signed it. And today, as of July 1st, students who are blind can take any course at a Board of Regents institution with no tuition or fees, all because of one gentleman who said, I am not satisfied with the status quo. I don't think it's right. And he got the legislators to support him. So one person could do it. And this is somewhat unique in that it happened really fast. Next slide, please. Okay, next, there we go. So a current example. This is an aerial view of Interstate 229 and Cliff Avenue in Sioux Falls. In the upper right-hand corner is Lincoln High School. And if any of you know Cliff Avenue in Sioux Falls, when school's in session, the backup is quite significant for traffic. And people don't like to wait in traffic. At this interchange and several other interchanges, there are some design changes that are going to be made. And this is what currently exists. Again, Lincoln High School is in the top right-hand corner. Residences are in the top left-hand corner. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see sort of a white line that sort of goes from south to north and then turns to the east. That's the bike pedestrian path. And on the left side, bottom left-hand corner, is a parking lot by the dog park, by the greenway, and by soccer fields. So this is an area that has a lot of use for a lot of different reasons. Next slide, please. The plan for this interchange basically is based on the idea of moving motorized vehicles as quickly as possible so they don't clog up traffic. And so to do that, if you're coming from the bottom, from the south, and you go and you want to get on 229, there is what is called a free right turn lane. If you're getting off of 229 going toward Lincoln High School, there's a free right turn lane. And so occurs also on the west side. Free right turn means you don't have to slow down. You just keep going fast. If you are walking up from the south to the north or north to the south, and there would be sidewalks or side paths on both sides, as a pedestrian, you would have to cross traffic 4 times. At 2 of those times, there is no control of the traffic because cars can go very quickly. And that's very dangerous. There are a lot of people who use that corridor. They're walking their dogs, they're riding their bicycles, they're going to school, they're pushing a stroller, they're heading to the soccer fields, whatever. And so a bunch of people from with that general area wrote to the contractors and wrote to the city and said, this is not safe. And there needs to be something different, like rumble strips that slow down people, a traffic light which takes away the free right turn. And what has been concluded is on the east side, the right side of the interchange, there would be a tunnel underneath the ramp so that people could walk under the road to the other side, underneath the bridge, come above ground, and then go under the tunnel to Lincoln High School. That's the plan, and we'll see what happens. Next slide, please. I'll come back to that interchange in a moment, but we're going to move on to mobilize or demobilize. When you're talking about getting something done, having collective action is important. Dr. Nord is the ultimate in collective action. He made things happen by getting an army to work on the topic of tobacco-free South Dakota. If possible, when you're pushing an agenda, find a champion, find someone who will be the face of your organization, the face of your issue. When you're engaging people, doing it on a one-on-one basis really works well. Engaging not only elected officials, but your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers. Email also works. And here's an important caveat on email. When you're using email, use your personal email. Do not use your work email. Your work email is for work. Your personal email is yours. I don't know why I wrote 211, so I'm not sure. Next one, times when elected officials make themselves available. Throughout the legislative session, legislators across the state go home on the weekends. They often meet at a local coffee shop or a hotel meeting room or something, and they take questions from people, either in an organized, very controlled fashion as in Sioux Falls, or very informal fashion as might happen in some of the smaller communities. Sometimes collective action might be a rally. When certain issues have been in front of the state legislature, there have been rallies in front of the Capitol to drive home a point. Using traditional media is important. Using the TV, the radio, and using newspapers are important. People still use that. A lot of people rely on TV in particular. And the more you can package your message, the more likely it will be carried forth as you packaged it. So I'll take an example. I did a workshop in Pierre, ran a workshop in Pierre several years ago on early childhood mental health, and brought in a speaker, and the front page and I sent a news release to the Capitol Times, and the front page of the Capitol Times on the day of the presentation featured this guy, featured his picture, and featured the news release exactly as I wrote it. And my presenter, and we were staying at the Dakota, my presenter, and they put newspapers in front of every door. He picked up the paper and he saw his picture on the paper. He said, "Wow, this is a great story." I said, "It should be. I wrote it." newspapers and media companies do not have the wherewithal, do not have the person capacity to do original reporting. So the more that you can package things in a way that is respectful, the more likely you will get it on the air or on the print. And finally, social media. Using social media to advance your cause is another important thing. Next slide, please. Following up is important. Always be polite. Representative Sly would tell me the first, if people start yelling and screaming at her in email, she presses delete. She never reads it. If someone does something you like, thank them. If you see them in person, even better, but clearly in a note, they voted the way you wanted, thank them. They came to your presentation, thank them. Always offer more information if necessary. So, I know a lot about childcare. If you have questions, please reach out to me. Be that resource to that person. And share your experience with others. Say, I talked to, Senator who or Representative Y, and here's what happened, and it was a good experience. And then also when you do follow up, identify what are the next steps. It's not just a one-off. It's stuff that happens many different ways. Next slide, please. Being vigilant is important. Going back to the 229 interchange, I received communication from the city saying we're building a tunnel under there. I go, okay, that's true. Show me the plans. I want to see it for real. It's only temporary until it's real. The win is only the first step. So during Dr. Nord's advocacy, there were bills that raised the, not bills, there were initiated measures that raised the tax on cigarettes and tobacco products to $1 a pack. And Representative Moore out of Yankton, who ran a business selling tobacco products, and reintroduced the bill saying $1 is too much, it should be 20 cents. And people were vigilant and they said, no, it's $1, and his bill was voted down. Knowing the rules, how things operate is important, and you got to always protect your win, realizing that sometimes that win is only a first step to something else, and you need to expand on your win. Next step, slide, please. So in closing, what you can do today. I would encourage you to write a short note to your elected officials. Again, going back to one of those earlier slides, sdlegislature.gov, find out who your legislators are, write an email to them, introduce yourself. My name is Greg Boris. I live in District 6, and that's important because some legislators will not talk to people outside of their district. One of my legislators will always write back when I send a note. I will not respond unless you're in District 6. So I always start my notes to him saying, I live in District 6 and here's my address. Put in your phone number also. So you're doing an email on your personal email account, talking about your name, address, and phone number. Talk about the type of work you do. I work with people with disabilities. I work in childcare. I manage a trucking firm and haul people's goods hither and yon. Say what you do and say, here's what I'm interested in. Here's my expertise. I'm available to you. I can help you in this area. So when I was lobbying in peer, I have background in disabilities, and that time they were talking about insurance and autism. And one of the legislators who was interested in that shared with me a potential bill and said, I know you know about autism. Look at this bill on insurance. Tell me what you think. And I looked at it and I went, oh my gosh, this is not very good. And I marked it up and I sent it to him. And I said, I would suggest you look at this, this, and this. And I gave it to him, and he never introduced the bill. And the next year, a much better bill was introduced. Not that I had anything to do with the new bill, but I stopped a bad bill from getting out there. Indicate that you will work to stay in contact. This is just not a one-off. I'm not just saying, hi, how are you? I'm going to still be here, and I'm not going away. And hope to say that you hope to meet that person and visit in person some days. Maybe at one of those weekend coffees, reach out to them. And again, close with encouraging them to contact you with their questions on your topics, on the topics that you have expertise in. So thank you. Last slide, please. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at greg.boris@usd.edu. And I know there's been possibly some questions. I'll turn it back to Kayla, or however she wants to run it, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, again, for all of your expertise. I did not have any questions come through the chat, but does anyone, if you'd like to come off mute and just ask Greg a couple of questions while we're here, you are more than welcome. I'll watch for people to come off mute here too, but one thing I did want to reference that I put into the chat was materials that Early Learners South Dakota has made in order for it to be extremely simple for you to reach out now with South Dakota specific messaging. So Lucy, would you mind giving me permission to share my screen, please? Greg also had a wonderful video. I don't know, Greg, if you wanted to share anything about it, I will put a link to.
It's just about expertise and getting into the weeds and not getting into the weeds. It's funny, but let's go on. You can watch it at your convenience.
Perfect. Yes, it's in the chat for you guys to watch if you have a minute to do so. I did want to just come back to this advocacy page real quick. This is on the Early Learner South Dakota, so earlylearnersd.org. You can there is an array of information here, but specifically under Get Involved in the Advocate marketing materials, we are pushing a public awareness campaign right now. And we would like these two hashtags pushed out as much as possible. If you go on Facebook, you'll see that many of them have been used. Pictures with kids, childcare centers. This is really just to get the message out there from a lot of different ways about why we need to support childcare. Below, this talks about childcare lets me work. If you are a provider or you are a parent, take this card, write in who your provider is, who is allowing you to be able to be at work and be capable at your workplace. Take action. Greg talked a lot about going to the writing letters to your legislators and communicating. This page will give you formats and templates that are already written up in order to make that process a little easier. Of course, as Greg mentioned, and I would reiterate, having it be as personable as possible is always best. How he even had to write, I am from district such and such in order to get that legislator's attention. Being as personal and specific as possible is wonderful. Last but not least, there's an entire social media toolkit. You quite literally only have to copy and paste. There are 10 pre-made social media posts. Use those as much or little as you want. You can even use the graphics and then type in your own message. But you will help us in spreading this message of why workforce is important, why early learning and solving this childcare crisis is important to South Dakota. It's going to take everybody's help to get us there. With that, I'm checking the chat one last time. I'm not seeing any additional questions, but real quick, I will just pause. Anyone else have any questions they would like to ask before we end for the day? We have a thank you in the chat, so that's good. And yes, Greg, as always, you are such a wealth of information. Do you have any other closing comments you would like to add?
Just want to say, if you have, sometimes we go out of these things and go, oh, I should have asked that question. I was wondering about this, I forgot. Do not hesitate to reach out to me. And again, my job at USD is to educate people on how to advocate, how to move the policy needle. And that's part of why I work with Early Learners South Dakota, because of that interest. My other reasons are that I'm very concerned that we make sure kids with disabilities are in the mix. And finally, in my lobbying days, as I mentioned at the outset, I did a lot of work with early care and education. So I know the history, but I also know that I don't know where things are right now.
Thank you so much. And yes, we have Greg's information. And again, you can reach this recording if you'd like to share it with a colleague on our site as well. It will be uploaded in the next couple of days. I want to just say thank you all so much. And again, if you're interested in joining us at the Children's Day at the Capitol on January 20th, please feel free to reach out and we'd love to have you there. And again, if you could help us spread the message on social media or just by word of mouth, that we would greatly appreciate your help there. Thank you all so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.